Kenjaku, the 1,000-year-old brain with a plan to bring utter chaos and ruin to the entire world, just out of pure curiosity, and Makima, the leader of the Public Safety Division, and a devil who, unlike Kenjaku, actually wants to save the world and make it a better place, although through not so good methods. In today's video, I'll be going over both of these characters and figuring out not only which of these two is actually stronger, but who would also win if these two were to battle it out. And with all that being said, let's discuss Kenjaku and see just how he stacks up in this matchup. When discussing Kenjaku, it's a bit difficult to get a good gauge of how strong he actually is, but there were statements that were made by Gege where he says that aside from Toji and Maki, Kenjaku in Geto's body has the strongest grip strength in the series, and that again, ignoring Toji and Maki, he also is one of the strongest hand-to-hand combatants without cursed energy. But these two statements by themselves aren't enough to actually give us a gauge of Kenjaku's strength, so I'll go over another statement that I think could help. Starting with him talking about what the qualifications are to be a special grade sorcerer. Kenjaku says that in order to qualify as a special grade sorcerer, you have to be able to overthrow a nation single-handedly. Now, there are a few ways to interpret this statement, and I'll let you all decide on what you think is valid or not. The first interpretation is that Kenjaku is saying that someone has to be able to destroy a nation with their power alone in order to qualify as a special grade. Now, if you do take this statement at face value, and because Kenjaku is possessing Geto's body and has his curse technique, which is what would help him destroy a nation, then you could just say that Kenjaku would be somewhere around country level given the situation. But that's only if you think this statement is being true and at face value. The second interpretation is that Kenjaku is saying that they have to have influence with their power to overthrow a nation, which you could maybe argue if you use the official definition of overthrow, which means to forcibly remove from power, and is also why he says overthrow instead of outright saying destroy. And then there's the third interpretation, which you could argue that Kenjaku was talking about having an army at your disposal, and said army can allow you to overthrow a nation. But I do believe that the second and third interpretations are more than likely valid, since we also know that Principal Yaga was being considered for a special grade strictly because of his ability to create an army of cursed corpses, and has nothing to do with his actual power. And then the second interpretation could also be valid, since Gojo, Yuta, and Yuki could use their power to influence change within nations, and is also what Kenjaku himself has done given the current situation of the story in the manga. But again, if you all think differently, that's fine, and let me know what you all think down below in the comments. The next statement that I would like to talk about is the statement Gege makes about Kenjaku versus the disaster curses, in which Gege was asked if Kenjaku would be able to use cursed spirit manipulation on Jogo, Hanami, or Mahito. And Gege responds by saying that if they were one-on-one fights, he'd have a particular hard time with the Jogo and Mahito. This pretty much shows that although it will be a hard-fought battle, Kenjaku does have some relativity to Jogo and Mahito, and given the right circumstances, could defeat them. And to be charitable to Kenjaku, as an extreme benefit of the doubt, I'll just say, for the sake of this video, that Kenjaku does scale fully to the likes of Jogo, with him being able to use his domain expansion to create a mountain-sized space, and also scales to Jogo's maximum meteor, which has been calced at around town levels of energy, meaning that at the low end, you could probably scale Kenjaku to small town level, probably even lower to be honest, maybe like city block or multi-city block level, all the way to his higher interpretation, which is mountain level. Now, there is one more thing I'd like to mention in regard to Kenjaku's AP, and that's Yuki's black hole feat that she did against him. I personally don't scale Kenjaku to this because the black hole was being suppressed heavily by Yuki and Tengen, and was nowhere near its maximum output of power. And although Kenjaku survived it with Kaori's anti-gravity curse technique, he was still heavily injured, and he also says that if it weren't for Yuki and Tengen suppressing the black hole, then it would have destroyed the entire planet. I think it's pretty obvious that Kenjaku doesn't scale to this feat, and even though he took precautions to guard against it, he still almost died. Not to mention that the feat itself is also super contentious, so I won't be using this feat to grant Kenjaku multi-continental or planetary AP. And now that I've talked about his AP, let's go over his speed and see just how fast Kenjaku actually is. Now, when it comes to the speed within the verse of JJK, there are times where it can be really bare bones and lackluster, or when talking about things like True Form Sukuna and Mythical Beast Amber Kashimo, then it can actually be pretty fast. Let me explain. When talking about the lackluster levels of speed, One of the many things that comes to mind is piercing blood. This move was stated to move faster than the speed of sound, and we see quite a few characters mention that this ability moves really fast. Like for example, Yuji, who during the Shibuya incident is able to barely dodge piercing blood multiple times despite knowing it's coming, and just has to try and tank the attacks to battle against Choso. Or how when Choso fires it at Yorame, and they mention how fast it is and that they'll have to block the attack with both of their hands, Kenjaku was also shown to just be able to blatantly dodge and be above this level of speed. During his fight with Choso and Yuki, Choso never lands a single clean hit with piercing blood on Kenjaku. And I read this fight for this video, like I read through this fight, Kenjaku never, not once, gets hit by piercing blood straight, like outright. He literally just dodges each and every single one of them. And Kenjaku also notes that it's a really good idea to use conventional weapons against Jujutsu sorcerers, meaning that sorcerers can't compete with speeds around the speed of sound. The speed of sound is also a consistent tier, with Naoya being compared to the speed of sound and said to be even faster than that, and was also said to reach Mach 3 after his metamorphosis as a cursed womb. So if you'd like to go with the speed of sound for Kenjaku, then this is a valid placement. The next speed tier I would like to go over is the lightning speed tier, or massively hypersonic or massively hypersonic plus. And this one is really up in the air for speculation, but I'll still go over it. Now, a part of this scaling stems from Maki's statement about how Kenjaku cannot be defeated by conventional means. And yes, guys, I know Maki has a track record of being quite incorrect and biased towards a certain person, but this statement does seem to hold some weight, as Kenjaku was able to 1v2 Yuki and Choso. Yuki being one of the 4 special grade sorcerers, and Choso who was getting amped mid-battle by his brothers. And these two should be relative to Kashimo and Hikari, with Kashimo repeatedly being shown and stated to be using lightning and firing off an arc of lightning at Hikari, with the latter being able to somewhat react to and dodge it, and him being said to be the god of lightning. And whether or not you think Hikari did dodge the lightning, he was still able to react to it to some capacity, and by proxy Kenjaku should as well, since if you do take Maki's statement at face value, then she should also be including Kashimo and Hikari in her statement, and by her assessment, these two also wouldn't be able to beat Kenjaku by normal means, which actually does make sense as to why they had Takaba fight Kenjaku and nobody else. But again, Kenjaku having lightning levels of speed is already really contentious, and there are arguments against this. But if you'd like to argue this, then by all means go for it. And then there's the light speed argument, and it's pretty logical to say that Kenjaku at this point in time does not scale to light speed by any means, and this would just be extreme wank. I have gone over the light speed argument in my previous 2 videos for JJK, but if you'd like to watch those videos, then I'll have them down below in the description for you all to check out. But to summarize the argument, Kashimo with his mythical beast Amber is able to utilize electromagnetic waves, which are said to move at the speed of light. In true form, Sukuna is able to keep up with and outpace this Kashimo pretty easily. And because these are the only 2 people that we have seen move this fast, and Kenjaku currently within the manga is unable to move, then that means Kenjaku cannot be light speed until further evidence is shown. And with Kenjaku's speed out of the way, let's go over his hacks and abilities and see just what he's capable of. Now, there are a few different things that Kenjaku has at his disposal, but the main thing that Kenjaku uses is curse spirit manipulation. And there are some curses that he has that I think are important to talk about for this matchup. The first curse that I would like to talk about is the smallpox curse, or the smallpox deity that he used to fight against Mei. This curse is actually pretty dangerous since its domain expansion makes it so that whatever opponent in front of it has the highest energy output, they get trapped underground in a casket while being further buried by a gravestone being on top of them. And if the opponent cannot escape the casket within 3 seconds, then they'll be infected by smallpox and die. I honestly don't see much to counter this, especially because the effect of getting trapped in the casket and buried is the sure hit, which means that it can happen instantly. And if the opponent isn't strong enough to break out of the casket, then they're pretty much dead. Next is the catfish curse spirit that Kenjaku implies he has. This curse spirit seemingly places itself underground and then materializes some sort of hole in the ground that the opponent then feels as though they're falling through, but in reality they aren't. This curse is quite confusing, and we only see Kenjaku use this during his encounter with Yuji during the Shibuya incident, But I wanted to bring this up since Kenjaku kinda talks about it, and we see some of what it can do. The next curse that Kenjaku has access to is his Asian Divine Curse. Now, we don't really know what this curse does, aside from the fact that Kenjaku says that this curse can remove obstacles and that it uses concepts against curse technique targets. And because this curse gets one-shotted by Yuki, we don't really get to see what this curse can actually do. But if you all have any opinions on what you think this curse could do, then please let me know down below in the comments, because I really am interested to see what you all have to say about this. But something else to note is that Kenjaku can combine all of his curses into condensed and concentrated curse energy with his maximum Uzumaki. And while this is pretty much a one-time use ability, since it combines all of the curses he currently has within his possession, the trade-off is that it is actually an extremely powerful attack that can pretty much end most fights that he's in. He can also use a mini Uzumaki where he doesn't use all of his curses, but just a lower unquantified amount, and the results are still pretty devastating. And aside from his curse spirit manipulation, Kenjaku also has access to his domain expansion, who, just like Sukuna's, doesn't have a barrier, and also gives Kenjaku a sure hit attack that basically cannot miss and instantly attacks the opponent, which also gives Kenjaku some added versatility. And then there's Kenjaku's gravity curse technique, and this just allows Kenjaku to use gravity to weigh down his opponents and potentially give him more ways to attack his opponent. And Kenjaku can even use reverse curse technique, which allows him to pretty much heal himself from most injuries. One of the downsides though is that it uses quite a lot of curse energy, and this ability is activated in the brain, and the only way to stop someone from using reverse curse technique is to either destroy the user's brain or to kill them with toxins. And that's all of Kenjaku's hacks and abilities out of the way. And now let's talk about the control devil herself, Makima. When it comes to talking about Makima and where she scales in terms of AP, it's kind of difficult given that we don't really see Makima do much throughout the series, pretty much until the end of part 1 of Chainsaw Man. But lucky for me, I can scale Makima not only by her feats that she does during this time, but also to the feats of other characters that she's either relative to or stronger than. For example, Denji gets slammed through multiple stories of buildings during one of his fights, with this feat being calced at small building level. And then there's the feat of the Typhoon Devil bursting through whole buildings, and this feat was calced at building level to large building level. Or the feat of Aki is the Gun Fiend, destroying many buildings in his fight with Denji, which is also calced at building level to large building level. And this is usually the range of many of the feats within the story for AP. So with this out of the way, let's go over Makima's speed. As for the topic of speed, the verse seems to fall within the ranges of subsonic all the way to massively hypersonic. For the subsonic feats, you can use power blitzing someone, which was calced at subsonic to subsonic plus. And then there's the feat of Kishibe sniping Denji in the head with a knife, and this has been calced at subsonic all the way to hypersonic. And then there's Makima herself with her bang ability when she was shooting Denji up into space, moving at high hypersonic to high hypersonic plus levels of speed. And then there's the blast that she fires at Kobeni, and this feat has been calced at around massively hypersonic. And if you want to wank, then you could possibly get the speed up for this feat to massively hypersonic plus, but like I said, that's just a wank and you don't have to. And so to reiterate, Makima has speeds that range from at the lowest subsonic to at the highest massively hypersonic, even massively hypersonic plus, depending on how you interpret certain feats or if you just wank. And with Makima's speed covered, let's go over her hacks and abilities. Makima has quite the list of abilities, and many of which we haven't gotten a chance to see within the manga, but because of what we do know, Makima is still a pretty dangerous and strong character within the series. Makima is a devil, and in the Chainsaw Man verse, these beings have many standard abilities that come with their constitution. They can form contracts with humans, have the ability to regenerate, and they also have superhuman physical stats, and much more. But as the control devil, Makima has the ability to control anyone that she views as inferior or weaker than herself, and should she encounter someone that is stronger than her, then Makima needs to beat them in a fight in order to be able to fully control them. She also has a contract with the Prime Minister that states that should she take any damage or die, then that damage she receives or death will turn into random illnesses and diseases and kill a random citizen of Japan. And she can basically keep reviving through this. And if you take our real world estimation of Japan's population, it has somewhere over around 125 million people living there. So technically Makima basically has 125 million lives before she dies. And Makima also has access to a few devil's abilities, like the Spider Devil, which gives her the abilities of a spider. She has the Future Devil, which allows her to see into the future. And she can use the Snake Devil to swallow other creatures and spit them back out to fight on her behalf. And she can use the Punishment Devil, which basically tortures people until they die. And these are all of Makima's main hacks and abilities. And with all of her scaling out of the way, now it's time to answer the question of the video. Who would win between Kenjaku and Makima? Let's find out. When looking at these two characters stat-wise, they're actually somewhat comparable, but with Kenjaku being a bit stronger when talking about their low-end scaling. Kenjaku at his lowest interpretation is somewhere around the city block levels of power with Mach 3 levels of speed, or in other words, faster than the speed of sound, while Makima at her lowest is around small building level while being subsonic in speed. And for those that don't know, subsonic is slower than the speed of sound, which means that Makima is physically weaker and slower than Kenjaku is. And if we were to use their higher interpretations, it actually gets worse for Makima in AP, as Kenjaku can be scaled all the way to mountain level or island level if you take Gege's statement of him being able to 1v1 and defeat Jogo and Mahito, although with some difficulty, and Jogo being stated to be stronger than Dagon, which would upscale Kenjaku since it's implied he wouldn't have much trouble with Dagon, and Dagon with his domain expansion being able to create an island-sized space, and Makima having AP that caps at large building level. But when it comes to speed, they're actually equal, with Kenjaku reaching massively hypersonic to massively hypersonic plus, with Kashimo and Hikari's lightning feats, and Makima reaching massively hypersonic, also maybe massively hypersonic plus, through upscaling from Rize and many other characters. But Makima could be faster, but so far Kenjaku has the edge in AP, and they're really relative in terms of speed. So now it would just come down to hacks and abilities. And in my opinion, I do think that Kenjaku would probably win. Not only is he smarter than Makima in both IQ and battle IQ, with him planning most of the things happening within the story of Jujutsu Kaisen, he's also done some impressive things like battle against Yuki and Choso, who were both gaining and giving each other intel on Kenjaku and his fighting style during the entire fight, with Kenjaku coming into the battle against Yuki blind and even compared her to a beast that needed to be taken down. He also planned the entire culling games, and for those that read the Jujutsu Kaisen manga, y'all know just how intricate and thought out this thing really is, and was able to even battle against and get through Takaba's curse technique, the Comedian, which makes whatever Takaba finds funny reality, and can even oppose Gojo himself. Overall, I do think Kenjaku was smart enough to possibly run down Makima's 125 million lives with his wit and cursed spirits that he has access to, and could even pull out his domain expansion if necessary, which has no barrier and has a sure hit attack that can instantly hit the opponent. And because his AP is higher than Makima's, then this could do some serious damage. And while Makima can also regenerate, so too can Kenjaku with reverse curse technique, although he can run out of curse energy and be unable to heal if that happens. Some things that give Makima an edge is the Future Devil's ability of Foresight, which would allow Makima to see into the future and avoid and prepare herself for Kenjaku's incoming attacks. And maybe the Snake Devil could work and could possibly absorb Kenjaku's cursed spirits and use them against him. Although at the same time, it might not work and cancel each other out, I'm not really sure. But this battle does come down to if Kenjaku can run down all of Makima's lives and put her down for good before he runs out of curse energy, which could be possible maybe with his domain expansion and really high battle IQ. And Makima has to eliminate Kenjaku quickly before he finds ways to take her lives and beat her for good. Overall, I do think this battle is pretty close, but I'd give the slight edge to Kenjaku. Thank you all for watching the video, and let me know down in the comments who do you think would win if these two were to fight. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and comment if you enjoy my content or are new here. And if you would like to see more of my videos, I have my Gojo versus Makima video on screen if you'd like to see how the Honored One does against her. Or if you'd like to see my previous video, which was Goku versus Gojo versus Saitama, then that is also on screen right now for you to check out. And I'll also have a random video on screen if you want to see just some other stuff that I do. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.